definitely opportunity to render some little personal service, then this is even the greatest thing. And this is something that we hear from many Srila Prabhupada disciples who didn't have so much opportunity to render any direct devotional service unto him, but at least they would have a little opportunity. Then this is something that would remain for a lifetime, not just for a lifetime, that would remain eternally there embedded in their minds. How Srila Prabhupada reacted and how Srila Prabhupada graced them, even just by a slight glance. These are very, very, very opportune and powerful moments that, as I said, serve one to dive deeper into Krishna consciousness, and they're very inspiring. And we see that devotees were ready to do anything practical for Srila Prabhupada. They were so surrendered. Why? Because Srila Prabhupada himself was so surrendered unto Krishna. So wherever Srila Prabhupada would go, devotees were just looking for an opportunity to make some arrangement again and also travel together and congregate at the place where Srila Prabhupada would give class or perform any kind of other function. Of course, class was always there. Like here, it is said that Srila Prabhupada would confine sometimes to his traveling secretaries that disciples should do some kind of preaching, that they should be engaged in giving classes, in giving lectures, but somehow or other there would always be some kind of an option for those disciples to get Srila Prabhupada to give the class so that they can hear from him, so they can relish that nectar from Srila Prabhupada himself directly. And devotees would have been surprised, as it is said here, that Prabhupada would agree. And of course, Srila Prabhupada never had any reservations. Whenever there was an opportunity for preaching, he would relish that opportunity, he would use that opportunity. Many times we hear how Srila Prabhupada was requesting his leading disciples to take over the management so that he can retire and write books. And we know, of course, how many books Srila Prabhupada wrote. And he wrote all of those simultaneously, practically managing the whole worldwide movement. He never stopped, he never got to rest, practically never got to rest. And still he was writing, he was lecturing, he was meeting so many people. Extremely, extremely active, extremely active. And of course, when somebody would meet such kind of spiritually dedicated, pure personality, they would be completely bound, spellbound, they would be so attracted. And there is no comparison of Srila Prabhupada to anybody else. So Srila Prabhupada would also sacrifice everything just for the sake of inspiring his disciples to expand his Krishna consciousness for benefit of all. After returning to Los Angeles for 4 days, Prabhupada then flew to New York for a week and then on to London for 2 weeks. In London, George Harrison and Ravi Shankar visited him several times at the Bury Place temple. When George asked if he should shave his head and try to live like the other devotees, Prabhupada replied that he should continue to be a singer. If you tell people to chant Hare Krishna, Prabhupada reminded George that they will do it. So this is a very interesting instance where Srila Prabhupada didn't just present the teachings of Krishna consciousness in only one certain type of way for everyone to practice it. He understood definitely that there is a variety of different types of conditionings, and especially when considering the preaching mission, how that preaching should expand and to which extent it can influence or reach out to the others, then Srila Prabhupada was just the most genius in that aspect of expanding the Krishna conscious movement. Like many times, anybody who comes in touch with Krishna consciousness, especially initially, when they start deriving the taste for Krishna consciousness, then there is some impetus to keep on trying surrendering more and more, especially in association and devotees. And what to speak if somebody who would be in direct association with Srila Prabhupada, as we said here. So George Harrison also was inspired to shave his head and practically join the ashram. And then Srila Prabhupada prevented him. He said, no, better you continue doing what you're doing. This is more important than just joining the ashram. And we see how actually in the, we may say, Western world now, not so much in India, but in the West, how strong, incredible influence, at least in last, practically since that time, 40 years, the George Harrison had such an incredible impact on the people by spreading Krishna consciousness, because he was connected to Krishna consciousness, because he was connected to Srila Prabhupada. Some few years back I was in Ireland and I was distributing books. We were going into societies door to door, and one of the small books that was going the most was Chant and Be Happy. Chant and Be Happy. And there is, of course, everybody there knows about the Beatles band and George Harrison, and it was very interesting. At that point, Bhakti Vikas Maharaj was also there. So he heard about the distribution and about some certain books that were going on there. So he remarked, he said, even after so many years, people are still buying this book. That's incredible. And why they're buying this book? Because, of course, they're very familiar with the Beatles, they're very familiar with the George Harrison. Just on those bases, then we can imagine how many books have been distributed since, practically, and how much people have been influenced by George Harrison. Just what an incredible service. Of course, we know he sponsored the Krishna book, printing of the Krishna book. At a time when there was no Lakshmi for printing Krishna book, and Srila Prabhupada was trying to get it printed, requesting different devotees, urging. And of course, everybody would always just depend on Krishna's mercy. And that there is the very interesting story how that Lakshmi for contribution of the Krishna book came. That was told by His Grace Shyamasundar Prabhu, that although they were friends, he, Mukunda Maharaj, Gurudas Prabhu and George Harrison, everybody would usually ask, of course, any wealthy person, for this project, that project, please, invest in this, invest in that. So they also felt that it would be inappropriate to influence the relationship in such a negative way and just brought it down to the level of just some kind of a, so to say, material or just some kind of a monetary exchange or interaction, help. So when Srila Prabhupada suggested to Shyamasundar that he should ask George for, there was a lot of pounds at those days, a lot of money. Shyamasundar Prabhu he said, it's just kind of went blank, just very, very shocked, thinking that if I do this, then I will ruin our friendship. Because many times I heard once how wealthy people actually, they essentially don't have many friends. They don't have many friends, because anyone who approaches them, the real reason for approaching them, it's not something deep, it's not something that it's genuine to the extent, it's not something that would be in relationship to them, but it's just because mostly they have some money. And then people consider, how can I utilize this? Or how can I become very close to this person so that I can extract that money? So it is very difficult to befriend someone if you really have so much opulence, because you never know who is genuinely approaching you and who is not. And most likely, nobody is approaching you in a genuine way to have the friendship. So therefore, devotees were very, very concerned. And Shyamasundar Prabhu, he said that he was just very shocked by that Srila Prabhupada's request. Of course, they were struggling in the early days. They had difficulties maintaining that bury place also here, and any other temple. So there was a lot of Lakshmi that was required. And now just to ask again for another kind of donation or support, that would be very, very risky, very risky. So Shama Sundar didn't know what to do. Essentially, he was thinking not to ask. But then since somehow or other Srila Prabhupada requested, then he went to meet George, and then he sat for the dinner, and dinner passed, and he just couldn't do it. He just couldn't ask. It was just something so difficult that he just couldn't do it. But then what Srila Prabhupada said before he left to meet, he said, you just do it and Krishna will help you. You just do it and Krishna will help you. So still Shama Sundar Prabhu, he said he spent the whole evening with George, and he just couldn't do it. It's such a burden. It was so difficult because he anticipated what the effects of such kind of request might be. And then somehow or other there was a somewhat stormy weather, it was raining, and then he was about to leave, was already getting late. And then he said, anyway, it's Srila Prabhupada's order, let me do it. Let me do it. And then somehow he mustered the confidence, and he just kind of spelled it out. And he said, George, Srila Prabhupada wants you to sponsor the Krishna book. Of course, before that he presented a little bit. He showed the manuscript, showed a little bit, explained a little bit about it, and then he just said, Srila Prabhupada wants you to do this. And of course, the George was also shocked. He was like become very serene, almost motionless. And then Shama Sundar said, I knew it. This is it now. That's, we just ruined the friendship. It's gone. And then, but in that moment, what happened? There was a thunder. And as the thunder struck somewhere very close nearby, the electricity went off. And it was complete darkness in the room. And complete silence. And then few moments after, the light came, and George was smiling. He said, after this, what can I say? So he agreed. So he said, after this, meaning after this, must be some Krishna sign, must be some Krishna's intervention. Then how can I refuse to sponsor the Krishna book? So he agreed and he sponsored, and then Shama Sundar Prabhu it was almost as if some kind of a miracle. And we see devotees it's not just we can say in the early days, there is always some kind of miracle. It's not easy to surrender to the instructions of the spiritual master. Very often we have certain type of reservations, being conditioned in various ways, or having false ego, or for whichever reason, it is not easy to surrender. But as Srila Prabhupada said, Shama Sundar Prabhu would recollect, he said, just go do it and Krishna will help you. So if we have that kind of mentality, then what is it there that it's not possible? Like so often we hear His Grace Rameshwar Prabhu narrating the stories of Chaitanya Charitamrita within 3 months being printed, And when Srila Prabhupada said, impossible is the word in the Fool's Dictionary. But yes, definitely, they had that faith. It's not easy to have that faith, just to fully surrender and try to execute the order of the spiritual master. But they did it. And we see this is so inspiring. And when we read about all these early days, we see how devotees were just so surrendered, because Prabhupada definitely had that purity, he had that potency, he had that conviction himself of Krishna consciousness, and he was just expanding this. There's no way in one sense that devotees wouldn't have been affected by Srila Prabhupada's enthusiasm. So here also we see that George, he wanted to He wanted to join. He wanted to kind of fully dedicate his life. But Prabhupada said, no, he saw greater preaching opportunity if he would have remained who he is on his position and just preach. And we know that he helped also Radha Krishna Temple. That was an album. Early devotees, they recorded that album, Yamuna Mataji especially, and through the 3 couples that initially went to London for preaching and established everything there. They recorded this album, and this album became #1 in several places for many weeks, and they had many concerts. They introduced so many people to Krishna consciousness. So many people heard about Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So many people got opportunity to buy the books. So many, it's just incredible, incredible, incredible. And also, what was very interesting, devotees talk about the revenue, about the Lakshmi that has been generated by such kind of preaching. They were able to support every preaching activity and maintenance and everything else. It was just incredible how much they were able to accomplish by this. And of course, who was, behind everything? It was George Harrison. He was the one who recorded, he was the one who played also certain instruments. Even this morning we are hearing, not this morning, every morning we are hearing Govinda Madipurusham. Whose is that? It's George Harrison. Of course, Yamuna Mataji singing. So just imagine, just by one song, so to say, or of course they made a whole album. You can go back home, back to Godhead just by that. But of course, there has to be some potency behind. And this is what George Harrison had. He didn't have to live in ashram, he didn't have to perform sadhana, he didn't have to shave his head. No need. Srila Prabhupada saw this actually in many ways much greater preaching than just if he would have just, come to ashram and, sweep the floor. So it depends. It depends how one is engaged, what are his propensities. But again, how one is connected to Krishna consciousness. So definitely for Srila Prabhupada, he was very clear, how to utilize everything. He was just perfect in utilizing everyone and everything in connection to Krishna. That was his perfection. He was just expert, absolutely expert. And we hear, like last time we were hearing also about, building of this Juhu temple, and how Srila Prabhupada was just so expert. He was just so expert, even they would say, one life member commented he was just paka businessman. He was paka everything. He was paka everything. It was just amazing how he would accomplish so many things, having such a vision, having such a determination, having such a faith in Krishna, even in spite whatever obstacles would have been there. And he also knew in this way how to engage someone in Krishna consciousness. How to engage in Krishna consciousness and how much could be accomplished. So this is also a lesson for us that we shouldn't be stereotyped. We should also have a much broader vision and see how somebody can contribute. In which way one can contribute in his life. Is it in this way that is the best, or is it in that way that is the best? So Srila Prabhupada presented a perfect example by this. July 20th. From England, Prabhupada went to Paris, where he lectured and performed an outdoor initiation ceremony at the Luxembourg Gardens. Hundreds of people, most of them student radicals from the nearby university, gathered to watch. Srila Prabhupada began his talk saying, "You French people have a history of being revolutionary because you're looking for a better way of life." When the words were translated into French, the students cheered and applauded. Srila Prabhupada continued, "Therefore, you should inquire into this Krishna consciousness. It is a revolutionary movement for reviving our original God consciousness." About 30 devotees from Germany had come to Paris, and most of them, along with many devotees from England, Amsterdam and Paris, received initiation that day at Luxembourg Gardens. In Paris, Srila Prabhupada attended a successful 4-day indoor festival where he was pleased to lecture and lead kirtans each night. So here we also see that even to Paris, devotees would travel from Amsterdam, from Germany, from different places just to meet again Srila Prabhupada, just to have an opportunity to associate him in one way or the other, at least even to hear, or at least even just to have some glance, just to see Srila Prabhupada. And again, how Srila Prabhupada was an expert preacher. We can see here, he understood his audience, revolutionary students, radical students. That means they wanted some change. Usually, of course, young people are, to quite an extent, pretty much revolutionary. At least in the West. They always look for something else, for something different. They have some understanding of the stale and unsatisfying material life. They're always looking for something better. And here was Srila Prabhupada, understanding perfectly the mind of his audience. He related that to Krishna consciousness. He said, you're all revolutionary, you want to change. Like we know, France has a history of so many very violent, bloody revolutions, changing so many different kinds of systems and hoping for better. But of course, it never got better. It never got better. Even recently, you can hear about some kind of yellow vests and this and that, and so many different protests going on. Of course, you don't hear it here in India, but there's always some kind of revolution, always some kind of unrest happening. And Srila Prabhupada was here. And he pointed out, yes, the most revolutionary thing actually is Krishna consciousness. Because what is more revolutionary than the change of consciousness? What is more revolutionary than the change of consciousness? This is the most difficult thing to establish, difficult thing to accomplish, to change the consciousness. And if we definitely apply that kind of consciousness in our life, then we can see how the most extraordinary and revolutionary that is. Because it just doesn't affect our being, it affects the whole universe, it affects the whole planets, the whole universe, everybody. But it has to start from us ourselves. This is the most revolutionary, because whatever any radical personality would want to change, there's a very, or almost insignificant, or practically no hope that something as such will happen. Why? Because there is no change of consciousness. No. There can be any change in this way or that way, but because people remain on the same level of consciousness, they perform practically the same activity with the same mentality. Nothing really changes. So Srila Prabhupada very expertly pointed out there has to be a change of consciousness because nothing else will change. So in this way he touched, he penetrated their consciousness to inspire them about Krishna consciousness. July 26th, in Amsterdam, Prabhupada installed the deities of Lord Jagannath, Lord Balaram, and Subhadra, and lectured at Wandel Park before thousands of hippies. One day at the Wandel Park, a devotee was addressing the crowd when Prabhupada suddenly told his disciples to stop. These people are useless, he said. Just hold kirtan. This is Amsterdam. Nothing much changed till today. It's pretty much the same. What was it? Maybe 3 years back or something. I spent some time there. It's pretty much the same. You just go out, hold the kirtan. Any philosophical discussion, it's just so difficult. It's just difficult. There are people, of course, who are intelligent and receptive, but it's so difficult. They're so conditioned by the environment, but that kind of sense-gratifying environment, which is very, very degrading. The whole mood, the atmosphere, it's very, very sensual. So just because of that, even if they have intellectual capacity, it's very difficult to retain or to absorb any spiritual message. It's a very small congregation. It's so tough. It's very, very difficult. It's very difficult. And of course, intoxication of any kind and so many other things are rampant there. They're just overspread. So it's not an easy place. It's one of the most difficult places practically to preach. And then what the devotees do? Yes, they go out, they hold kirtan, and they distribute prasadam. Same thing as when Srila Prabhupada he just immediately could say what is going on. He says, there's no use of lecturing. Just go out and, hold the kirtan. That's all, Amsterdam. There's one interesting pastime. During this installation of the deities, I don't know if this will come, we'll see later on, of these deities of Lord Jagannath, Baladev and Subhadra. Actually, everything went wrong. And what was the most interesting, the whole event was directly broadcasted through some certain TV network. And everything was there. The TV was there. They were shooting like this morning during Mangal Arati. They were directly, shooting what was going on, and devotees were behind the curtain. They were trying to create some kind of an altar. And then what happened? The altar turned out to be too small. And the time for opening the curtain and initiation ceremony, everything was coming close, and there was so much anxiety, so much agitation, and then what to do? Then decided, okay, we'll remove, we have to cut, we have to adjust. And nothing was ready, absolutely nothing was ready. Then somebody was sent to bring some fruits, but he brought flowers. Then he said so many things, everything went wrong, like so many things, and Prabhupada was becoming furious. Prabhupada was becoming furious. And then even when the curtain opened, every devotee, there was just complete mess. There was just complete mess. And Prabhupada, it's like kind of, it's like, oh no, it's like, it's just nothing was ready, nothing was as it should have been. And Prabhupada was really getting upset and angry. And then some devotee said, and asked Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada, why are you angry? Just chant Hare Krishna. Just imagine somebody just coming, approaching Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada, just chant Hare Krishna, be happy, That is pretty heavy. It's like, and sure enough, Srila Prabhupada just took it big back, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna. And devotees had kirtan and, Haribol, that was it, what do you do? So Srila Prabhupada, later he wrote to disciples in the West, we are observing here in Europe, many hippies have become so disgusted with material life. But they are also now so much degraded that they will not hear our philosophy, simply mocking. So our devotees may become very much learned to remove their doubts and become very much fixed in Krishna consciousness. But so far, preaching to the general public, especially the hippie class, it is better not to preach much philosophy. Just somehow or other, get them to chant Hare Krishna mantra. And if some of them are curious to learn something, they may purchase our books. Only if they chant with us, that will help them. So again, we have to see, it's like, if somebody is overly degraded, and in that sense maybe sometimes even not just innocently degraded, but having some demoniac mentality, then it's definitely better not to preach. Then it's like some kind of ninth offense to the holy name, preaching to those who are faithless. And it's like feeding a milk to the snake, it's just agitating, unnecessarily agitating. Of course, luckily here it didn't come to some kind of very agitating point, like sometimes in Australia we hear about one student gathering where there was quite an agitation that was created during and after Srila Prabhupada's class and so on. So therefore, one has to be, and always, of course, even in France, we hear, when Prabhupada would lecture, one lecture once in Paris, he was challenged that if you're talking about Varnashram Dharma and the greatest position, like somebody challenged Srila Prabhupada, then why you're sitting on the Vyasasan? Do you think that you're the greatest? That's a very direct challenge to Srila Prabhupada. And then Prabhupada just hung his head and humbly replied, I'm the servant of the servant of the servant of the servant of the servant. I'm everyone's servant. I'm not the greatest of anything. So humble. That's Srila Prabhupada's reply. because that was the fact. He didn't explain, no, this is how you should treat the Guru, this is for disciple benefit, this and that. No, Srila Prabhupada simply said, no, I'm the servant of the servant of the servant of the servant. Anyway, so there were so many different kinds of and types of challenges that Srila Prabhupada was exposed to. So here, seeing the public, he just understood that there's no point of lecturing too much, because then they just become, like here it said, they simply start mocking sometimes. They don't understand the philosophy. Like when you preach, you see that somebody, there's no capacity to understand the philosophy, then they just ridicule. They can't understand. So then better, like Krishna states in Srimad Bhagavad Gita, even at least if somebody has a little faith, then we shouldn't discourage them from that. We should just encourage that faith. We shouldn't just tell them drop everything and just, take to Krishna consciousness and this and that. Because in that case, that is just not going to work. So whatever level people are, and at least if they come to association devotees and they just hear, that's even great. That's wonderful. So they should be just encouraged on whatever level they are until they become purified and until they start advancing so that they can take advantage of more understanding and application of this Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada said, what is the point? Better just, let them chant. Let them keep on chanting as much as possible. And of course, chanting and bhajans and kirtan, that was something that was very attractive in those days. Very attractive. Somehow it was very caring, in a sense that it has so much potency and everybody would have been pulled in this vibration of chanting of Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So in this way, people would be benefiting. And of course, you absorb that Maha Mantra, you become purified, knowingly or unknowingly. Srila Prabhupada would say on the japa tape, knowing and unknowing that the mantra has its effects. It's just like a medicine. Whether you know it how it works or you don't know it how it works, it will have its effect. But of course we have to be careful, and devotees have to be careful therefore not to be affected by that environment. They have to be very fixed and focused. As I said in Amsterdam, it's just very, very difficult. If somebody remains there for a longer period of time and it's very casual about devotee association, he will be very, very strongly affected. Very strongly affected, and this is why it's not easy to remain a devotee in such a place. When we would go out for a Harinam, you can't avoid but break the regulative principles. We were also breaking regulative principles. Fall down. Knowingly or unknowingly. Can't avoid. Because when we went through the streets, there were smoked so much ganja and so many other things that the whole street was smoked practically with it. So what do? You can't avoid. Passive smoking. And of course, we definitely were very careful to avoid certain areas of the city and just, go in the kind of tourist or more crowded but somewhat safe areas. But it affects, everything affects. This is the preaching. So there, how can you be, where's the question of any philosophy? And then as Srila Prabhupada said, if somebody approaches and asks, and if there is a chance for distributing books, that's the best. Just give up the books. So then let Srila Prabhupada preach. And as most often as he would point out, what is the use of our, 3-minute or so many minutes preaching? Better just to give the books. And let Srila Prabhupada preach. July 29th, at Edinburgh, Prabhupada was greeted by almost a dozen reporters from various newspapers in Scotland. Kishore, Edinburgh is a stuffy, puffed-up, tradition-steeped place. But Srila Prabhupada was very cordial and humble with the reporters. So they were very proud of their heritage, whatever traditional heritage they had. Prabhupada was giving them so much credit about how nice the country was and how nice the Edinburgh was. That reminds of that instruction of Prabodhananda Saraswati. You know, he wrote in many intimate pastimes of the interactions of Radha and Krishna, and his samadhi is there, very close to practically on Kaliya Ghat in Vrindavan, and he was the uncle of Gopal Bhatta Goswami. He is a Tunga Vidya, Gopi, in the spiritual world. So he wrote one statement that Srila Prabhupada used very much, that when you go out for preaching, and this is we see what Srila Prabhupada was using often, when you go out for preaching, you just flatter their person. Oh, you're so great. Oh, you're so wonderful. You did so many amazing things. And then person will say, yes, yes, I'm so great, I'm so wonderful, I did so many wonderful things, yes, yes, yes. Yes. And you're so learned, you know so much about life and the Shastra and this and that. And the person said, yes, yes, I'm so learned. But please, he said, then you beg at his, fall down at his feet and beg, but please, now you forget all of this and just surrender to Krishna. Just reject and discard all of this and just surrender to Krishna. So Srila Prabhupada would also preach like this. So he said, what a nice buildings you have, Srila Prabhupada was saying. Oh, you have 2 colleges here. Yes, yes, we have 2. Very proud they were. So you have many students here. Yes, yes. It's a very affluent city. Edinburgh. Yes, oh yes, very rich and opulent. And then Srila Prabhupada said, so you have so many students, you have so many nice, big buildings, you have so much facility for enjoyment. And they were agreeing, yes, yes, we have all this. And Prabhupada just looked at them and straight and said, then why are your universities producing hippies? Wow. Typical Srila Prabhupada, just see how, yes, yes, and then just gada on the head. And then how you wouldn't wake up? Yes, yes, and now what? Now what? So they looked at one another and no one could answer. And Prabhupada began to explain how society cannot bring happiness or contentment simply with buildings, stones and windows. He said, where is the happiness here? There. So in Glasgow, Srila Prabhupada lectured at Woodside Hall before an audience of almost 1,000. Wow, that's a huge gathering. Kishore, Prabhupada was sitting on stage on his Vyasasana. The crowd was very large, and even the balcony was overflowing. When Prabhupada arrived, the students greeted him like a pop star. They were cheering and whistling. Prabhupada immediately began lecturing very heavily on the basic science of Bhagavad Gita, how Arjuna became a successful devotee by killing all his friends and relatives. At the end of the lecture, I was a little bit apprehensive as to whether the people would accept that heavy lecture or not, but they cheered and applauded. So Prabhupada was very straightforward in his presentation of Krishna consciousness. There was recently one quote I just read, Srila Prabhupada made some very strong statements, but he said our society is not there to make any compromise. They can go anywhere else. Something paraphrasing along that line, Srila Prabhupada was pointing out that Krishna consciousness movement is meant for Krishna consciousness. Any other social or beneficial so-called activity that people might consider to derive from any religious society, this is not what Krishna consciousness is meant for. So it was very, very straightforward, and he understood, like he would come to universities and preach like this, and he would point out, where is that universities which is teaching us about soul, teaching about so many things in relationship to body, but where is it university that is teaching you about the soul? What do you know about the soul? What do you know about the life? Nothing. You only know about the death. You only know about the dead matter, because body is dead. So then what is yours? So Srila Prabhupada was very straightforward. very straight to the point, very Krishna conscious. So when it came to the question and answer time, one man came all the way down the aisle from the back of the hall and stood at the foot of the stage and looked at Srila Prabhupada. For several moments he spoke on and on and on, talking very proudly. I am this, I am that, and then concluding, I am God. That was the conclusion of his little monologue. The whole crowd was hushed, and I thought, what's going to happen now? Prabhupada simply looked down and let the silence continue for a few moments more. Then Prabhupada spoke. So, you're God? You have nothing more to say? You're God? You're dog. And immediately the crowd stood up and applauded and cheered. The man just looked at Prabhupada and smile came on his face. How he was defeated. With just those few words, he had been defeated. He simply walked all the way back, again to back of the hall, and was finished. It was ecstatic, because the crowd was participating in the whole thing, and they realized that God is not cheap. Similarly, there was another instance, very similar. Prabhupada had such kind of interactions in Australia. There was one, like we heard that wizard, he was kind of popular in the society, and he was dressed like a Merlin the wizard, long coat and hat and this and that. And he also kind of made some statement, and he also kind of pointed out that he's the God. And then Srila Prabhupada just remarked, he said, so, everyone here thinks that he's a God, so what makes you so much different than them? Means he was presenting himself as a being different. But because everyone thinks that he's the God, then Prabhupada just said, what makes you think that you're so different? Nothing. Everybody thinks the same. You got that? Yeah? Okay. Oh, everybody thinks he's the God. He also said, I'm God. So then why are you so different? There's nothing different. You're God, they're God. So then what do you think? Why you should be so different? You're not different. Just same like as everybody else, in complete Maya. Then we had Kirtan, and everyone in the audience was dancing. At that time, they had gotten a bit lax at the door, and the local street urchins, anyway, from this low-class area of Glasgow came into the hall, and they all began dancing and singing. Some of them tried to get up on the stage. Prabhupada was also chanting, and so these kids were also trying to get around him and get on the stage to chant. Devotees started to push these dirty little children off the stage, but Srila Prabhupada said, don't do that. These children are all devotees. Let them chant. So that's interesting how you can see that when that nature is not yet manifested in the young children, then they're so spontaneous in chanting. They're so spontaneous. They'll just come and chant, no matter what it is. Whenever they hear Harinam, Kirtan, you see in the villages. When you go here in India in some villages, of course in the city, forget it. In the West, small kids, they won't start chanting, they'll do something else. I won't say what they'll do. They're already, that conditioning is like already whatever. But in this, when that conditioning is not brought forward and they're not contaminated and they're simple-minded like this, you see how immediately, just by nature, they start chanting, they start dancing. It's just so natural, so natural. When I was in Africa also, we went, Africa is a place, you go for Harinam, you'll get all the kids there. All the kids from the village, they'll come, you'll have, dozens and hundreds of them just chanting around, just, like here, like they would come and they'll just gather around you and chant Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. They don't know what they're doing, but they'll just chant and dance and jump around and follow you as long as the Harinam goes. So simple, very, very simple-minded. But they will take to chanting of Hare Krishna, and this is what matters. And this is what Srila Prabhupada pointed here, not to discourage them, let them chant, let them be here. Let them take the benefit. So when Srila Prabhupada finally got up to leave again, he reminded me of some big celebrity. He was smiling and waving and walking off the stage, and the audience were all shouting, no, no, no. They began chanting, more, more, more. Jai. So everyone was ecstasy. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Any comment or question? Quickly. No. Srila Prabhupada Lilamrit ki, Srila Prabhupada ki.